All right, welcome everyone to today's webcast. My name is Craig Stickelmaier. I'm a project engineer here with Risk Management Professionals, and today I'll be talking to you guys about how to approach the idea of a remote compliance audit. It's a very suitable topic given the times with the whole coronavirus pandemic, and everyone's working from home or may have some influx of stay-at-home work orders. So we're really trying to think about how we can best adapt to the current situation with what we do. So hopefully this will be a helpful topic for some of you. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. Here's kind of an overview of what we as a company provide service-wise. Anything from process hazard analysis and LOPA analysis to full-on program developments, or what we specialize in as a company and a consulting firm. If you guys want any more information, please refer to our website, www.rmpcorp.com. And kind of to go over what we'll be talking about today is, at first I'm going to give you guys kind of an overview of the regulatory requirements for compliance audits. Then we're going to go through and kind of touch upon the difference between a documentation review versus a full-on compliance verification audit. And then we'll kind of get into some tips for getting the job done remotely. What are some advantages, disadvantages, highlights and lowlights. So compliance audits are required as an evaluation by CalARP, US EPA RMP, and OSHA PSM. We as a company, we're headquartered out of Irvine, California, so we included CalARP regs and we work very closely with the CalARP regulations. But we also do a lot of work with other regulations, state regulations at the state level. We're very familiar with the Nevada chemical accident prevention programs, as well as some other state regulations. But for the purpose of this webcast, we're going to include some CalARP regulations as well, just to kind of show that the compliance audit is, required by more than one agency. And on the next slide here, you guys can see just how much they do overlap. Compliance audits are required in different sections of the different regulations here, as well as a number of other program elements for process safety and chemical accident prevention. So as I said, the requirements between CalARP, RMP, PSM are nearly identical requirements, and also as well for the Nevada chemical accident prevention. They also have some similar regulations towards what is outlined in EPA, RMP, and OSHA PSM. But in terms of what the audit is required to comprise of, is basically just certification that you are in compliance with what is outlined in the regulations. This needs to be done every 3 years. The compliance audit review team is supposed to include someone who's very knowledgeable in the process, as well as knowledgeable of the requirements that are needed by the regulations. In terms of what is needed for the audit, you need to document whatever findings you do have as that come out of the audit. You want to be able to address the deficiencies you do find, either in terms of some sort of action item or recommendation that is made at the end. And you are supposed to also are required to retain the two most recent audit reports. And as part of the compliance audit, you're going to be mainly reviewing all of the prevention program elements, including any supporting documentation that might come with it. Elements are going to vary depending on the program level of the facility, whether you are program level 1, 2, or 3. Typically, program level 3 is more rigorous. You have a lot more elements that you see on the screen here that are required to be encompassed in your RMP, risk management plan, or process safety management plan. And so now I think we're going to get into the difference between documentation review versus an actual full-on follow-through of compliance. So just to kind of highlight, one way to complete the audit is to just look at the paperwork and make sure that you do have some sort of system for tracking whatever is required by the process safety regulations, process safety management regulations, or risk management plan regulations. And then you also have the due diligence of verifying compliance, where you go more in depth and you're reading between the lines. Is this stuff being maintained? Do we have records that it shows that compliance is being met? As a company or as a consultant, third party, external auditor, we oftentimes ask our client directly whether they're looking for what kind of audit they are looking for, whether it's going to be they want a more in-depth audit or if they're just looking to satisfy and check the box. This is something we really just ask them straight off the bat. Some companies prefer different things, while most companies do actually prefer, that we go through and make sure their compliance is up to date and that we verify that their compliance records are satisfactory. Some clients, might be looking for something just temporary at the moment, and so we can just do a quick review or something that's less intense than an actual verification and follow through of verifying compliance. Technically, the only prevention program elements that are required to be audited per regulations are what were outlined below, or just basically the prevention program elements, whatever's in your outlined by the RMP and PSM. But if we were to do a thorough compliance verification, typically would also want to look at the EPA RMP submittal, whether that was filled out correctly. We'll look at the hazard assessment or the offsite consequence analysis. Even though those don't have dates that need to be updated associated with them, they do need to be updated every 5 years at some point. And so while they aren't pretty much part of what needs to be reviewed as part of an audit, we do that out of due diligence. Another thing that we also like to go the extra mile with is emergency response plans and making sure those are adequate, that they exist, that they're posted and accessible, stuff like that. Again, these maybe aren't required per a straight up audit, but we do like to do an assessment of those as well if we're trying to be thorough, since a regulator or whatever administering agency is doing an actual audit, it could be a source of a citation if there's a deficiency in those extra elements. So again, we like to not only determine if regulatory requirements are met, but also address the effectiveness of the program that's in place at the facility. And again, I'm not sure if I mentioned yet already, but we aren't. It's not required to use a third-party auditor to complete the compliance audit. It can be done internally, which is totally okay. For the purposes of this presentation, obviously I'm coming at this from an external auditor viewpoint, but I will be doing my best to kind of give tips and tricks for doing a remote audit in the event that the audit is being done internally. But like I said, I think that there is some good valuable viewpoints to provide as an external auditor. Like I said, most clients that we have, they prefer to do the in-depth compliance verification to make sure they have an effective program. But again, that's not always the case. Some clients want something that's a little less thorough, that might be less intense and less or more cost effective. In any event, though, it is important to establish what kind of audit needs to be laid down, or what kind of audit is expected off the bat. That way, the preparation can begin to take place more efficiently. If we know we're looking for a more in-depth audit, we'll be asking for more stuff up front as part of the preparation, versus maybe if it's a more low-key or less intense audit, maybe some stuff wouldn't have to be as documented up front. But as you see in the next slide, we'll be talking about how to approach an audit from 3 different steps. First step is going to be the preparation phase of the audit. The next step is going to be the actual implementation phase of the audit, and the third step is going to be the finalization phase, or the closing of the audit. This is basically the same kind of approach that we take for a normal on-site audit. So not much changes here, but things do change in regards to the preparation phase as well as some of the implementation phase. The finalization phase is not so much changed due to doing a remote audit or off-site audit. That really just involves the paperwork of the documenting the responses and putting together reports and recommendation lists. Those are usually done off-site anyway. But as you'll see soon, that the preparation phase does get kind of altered for an off-site audit. So going right in, as part of the preparation for an on-site audit and an off-site audit, you really want to define the agenda and schedule that's going to take place. And this is going to be more key for an offsite audit than it is for an onsite audit, when you can be face-to-face with whoever's there and talk to them and kind of hash out details. For an offsite audit, preparation is key. You want to ensure that everyone's on the same page. You want to ensure that everyone knows if they're going to be a part of the audit, if they need to be interviewed or not. You want to know what the dates are going to be, if we're going to be getting people on Microsoft Teams or Microsoft Teams or Skype calls. People will want to know if they should be expected to be on the call or if they should be on standby. And you want to know what times and dates that those meetings might take place. This will be important in order to streamline things later. Another thing you want to ensure, I mentioned Microsoft Teams and Skype, which are very compatible collaboration tools to use. Again, a simple phone call could also work at times. I'll go into detail later about why Microsoft Teams and Skype might be better to do offsite audits. But in terms of the preparation phase and defining a schedule and agenda, you want to make sure that everyone has access to Teams and Skype. Who needs to have access to it? Are they able to work Teams and Skype? A lot of this remote stuff is becoming new fairly quickly, so people might not be very familiar with how to handle Microsoft Teams and Skype and different computer elements of that. So it's important during the preparation phase you make sure people know how to use it and that they're able to run programs okay. You want to make sure that meeting invites are sent out adequately, whether it's going to be in Teams or Microsoft Excel. That way people can join the meeting. Again, anytime you want to make a meeting, also a phone call is what we used to do in the past, and that's still up to date and still pretty collaborative today. You can get conference calls going as well, but again, sometimes conference calls require certain access to be able to plan a conference call that can take more than 2 people if you have people calling from different areas. So again, really just define the agenda and schedule, make sure the technology is up to date and that everyone knows how to use it and access it. Another thing you want to do is an electronic files check. Usually from the third-party auditor, external perspective, what we do in the preparation phase is kind of send out an information request to the client, and we'll ask them for certain pieces of documentation. And usually we'll be very specific with that. That way we can get an in-depth look at the program elements. But obviously if we're going to be doing this remote, we won't have access to the physical copies, so we want to make sure that we have electronic copies of whatever documents that we'll be requesting. And this might be a little hiccup, which I'll talk more in detail about the possible disadvantages of this later, but this was going to be a big one, is that if you guys don't have electronic files, or if some files aren't available electronically, this might be a little bit of a hindrance. So you may need to scan some files to put them onto the computer, or take some screenshots of some software printouts. You want to make sure, as part of the preparation phase, that if you need to send files over email, that the files aren't too big to send via email, and if they are, how are you going to combat that? Maybe another option you could do would be to use Dropbox if you guys have access to Dropbox, or maybe mailing thumb drives in the mail could be also another issue. But you want to make sure that this gets covered in the preparation phase, that way you're not stuck later on saying, oh, I need to look at this file, whoops, can't get it to you. So yeah, you want to make sure that you have right access to files. You also want to, like I said, plan on who you attend in the meeting. Make sure that if an operations person needs to get interviewed to talk about operating procedures, for example, that they are expecting to be as part of this audit, and they are known to be a part of the meeting. And as part of the initial documentation request, another thing you want to ask for besides the prevention program elements are going to be any recent county or regulatory inspection reports. This is on a case-by-case basis, but maybe if the administering agency has recently done an inspection, a formal inspection on the facility, and in their report they cite any deficiencies, that'll be good. That's good information to hand up to an internal or external auditor up front. That way they know what deficiencies to look for in their own audit. They know what the regulator wants to see, what kind of they are concerned about, what recommendations they made. That way we can fix them as part of this internal audit. So again, that's a case-by-case basis, and that's not going to be the case for every single off-site audit. But if there is some sort of inspection report that was done recently, we'll want to take a look at that too before we get into the actual audit, to kind of get a heads up view of what's going to be expected. In terms of the electronic copies of the RMP prevention program elements, we'll want to ask for specifics. This will help us later on to make sure, again, that we're verifying compliance and that the program that's in place is effective. So when we ask for specifics, we want to plan on a transmittal timeline. And what I mean by that is I want to make sure that you want to make sure that it's clear what information will be sent over and when it will be sent over. For example, if we're going to be looking at the prevention program elements first, then we'll take a day to look at that, or however long to take a look at that first. And then if we're planning to do a review of operating procedures later with actual operators on the call, then we'll make sure we want to plan a date for that where the operators are available. If we want to plan a review of interviews, any kind of interviews for personnel, we want to make sure that they're going to be available, and we plan this ahead of time. So that's why it's important to kind of establish a transmittal timeline. For example, say we're going to kick off the audit on Monday, and on Monday we're going to kind of go through, it's going to be a kickoff presentation. We'll kind of describe to everyone who's involved how the audit's going to take place off-site. And then on Tuesday we'll review some initial documents that we requested a week before or however time before that. And then on Wednesday, then we'll get together for any questions that we had during our review on Tuesday, and so on and so forth. We just want to make sure that there's a timeline that's set up and that could be routinely abided by during the audit. So that'll be most of the preparation phase, is kind of just, like I said, requesting documents and making sure everyone's on the same page. And again, it's going to be more important that everyone's on the same page for an offsite audit, as you obviously can't be face-to-face and you can't hash out details with a simple conversation. So again, preparation is going to be key for this. This leads us to our next step, which is going to be the implementation phase of the audit. This consists of the complete documentation review, where we're going to be reviewing all the elements that were sent to us via files. Or if you're doing this internally, you're going to be reviewing all the documents that you're able to have access to electronically. And if you are doing an internal audit, obviously maybe it's not going to be, you won't have as a hard time completing the offsite or completing the audit remotely, as you could probably go into the facility. You have access to the facility, so you can go in and grab any files you need that aren't electronically. But again, we're trying to come at this with two kind of lenses here, both internal and external auditing. But as far as implementation goes, this also includes conducting interviews with personnel and documenting their findings. So for example, personnel interviews, you're going to be including operators, where we review the operating procedures with the operator over the phone. What we've done in the past, we've actually done a couple of remote audits so far within the past couple of months. And typically what we'll do is we will just have an operator on the phone or some sort of Microsoft Teams or Skype call, and we'll both have the written procedures in front of us, and we'll kind of go through step by step. Hey, is this what you still do? Walk me through this step. Is this step still conducted? Et cetera, et cetera. So this is still kind of can be done offsite. We'll also want to verify mechanical integrity samples for whatever equipment we select, and we'll also want to verify PID accuracy during this phase. I have a little star next to those two elements because if you are able to get PIDs early, then you would be able to look at what kind of equipment is in the process that's being regulated. And as an external auditor, what I would do, I would look at the PIDs. I'd pick out a specific vessel or a specific valve number, for example, any kind of piece of equipment, but I would be specific in what kind of equipment I'm looking at, and I request documentation for that specific piece of equipment. So for example, if I was looking at vessel V-1, I'd want to ask for any kind of inspection records in the past 3 months. For example, for that vessel, I'd want to also ask for pictures of that vessel in the field, and those two items could possibly satisfy your PID accuracy and also satisfy that mechanical integrity is being implemented for this vessel. For the PID accuracy, I think it'll be sufficient to, what we've done in the past is that we find that it really is sufficient to just send pictures. For example, I'll request a specific PSV. Hey, can you send me pictures out what it looks like out in the field for PSV 70-12? And I want pictures of the piping, pictures of the PSV itself, and that way I can verify if on the PID it says that the inlet and outlet block valves to that PSV are car sealed open, as they should be. then I can look at the picture, and then I can see the car seals, and we can verify that what's on the PID is actually what is out there in the field. So yeah, that's one way to kind of go about this, and I did want to make a note that it might be easier to streamline this if you are able to get PIDs or drawings earlier, ahead of time. That way you can kind of pick and choose what kind of equipment you want to take a closer look at during this implementation phase. And as part of the implementation, once you review all the documentation, you conduct all your interviews, and you're able to document the findings, you'll want to conduct a closeout meeting just to kind of get everyone on the same closing page. Everyone who was involved in the audit, you want to make sure that they are aware of what was found, what wasn't found, and how the finalization phase is going to take place. And so as part of the finalization phase, like I said, this doesn't really change too much with getting this done remotely. This involves recommendation tracking and putting together some sort of action tracking log, or making sure that whatever findings or deficiencies are found in the audit, that they're going to be addressed later on, and developing some sort of report to put all the findings together. So again, this doesn't really change in terms of how you can do this off-site. Typically, as an external auditor or a third-party consultant, we usually do this off-site anyways after we're done on-site with all the documentation review. So nothing really changes here, but again, this is still a part of the audit process. So here I'm just going to kind of summarize what I just talked about in the last 3 slides from the last 3 phases in terms of a flowchart. So the first kind of step is going to be providing electronic documentation for all the program elements. Typically via email. Again, if you're not able to email certain big files, maybe you can have another way of doing this. Either if you're doing this internally, may it be easier for you to just go on site and get whatever paperwork you need. Or if you're like an external auditor, maybe you can have someone mail you a USB drive. Again, this will take time. That's why you want to make sure you have adequate preparation time to allow time for that. But the first kind of step is requesting the documentation that you're going to be looking at as part of the audit. The next step is going to be reviewing the documentation that you're provided with, and kind of making notes along the way saying, hey, I need more information on this, or hey, I would like more clarity on this. I want to ask people at the site what they know about this, but kind of just making notes along the way what you're going to follow up with after reviewing these sheets. So like I said, after you take a stab at whatever information you're given, you want to make sure that you're going to be planning some sort of come together meeting or collaborative meeting with site personnel. That way you can discuss where certain information might be located. As part of a normal compliance audit, when we're on site as an external auditor, we'll always want to identify where we found the information we're looking for, where it's located. That way anyone else that comes in and reads the audit findings, they can go into this, we can direct into the same spot that we found it. Again, if you're doing this remotely and you're getting kind of a lot of files emailed to you randomly, right? It's not part of one binder. You're getting a file here and a file and an email tomorrow and a file and email from a week ago. We still want to make sure that we document where those files are normally found on site, if they're in physical form or if they're in electronic form, what kind of file server you can go to access these files. It will be still important to document the location of files as they come across. And again, we're going to be planning another meeting or a teleconference with people to kind of follow up on whatever items we find, whether we're doing this audit internally or externally. There's always going to be questions and some clarifications that need to be made upon initial review of documentation. So this kind of telecollaboration meeting is going to probably be pretty important. That way we can follow up on what we find and get more clarity. This is also a good time to have operators on the call to discuss operating procedures, or certain employees or training managers to discuss how training is done, for example. All the relevant personnel that kind of are specialties in different areas of the facility, we'll want to get them on this call, or at least plan out a time where we can get a chat with them if they don't want to be part of a collaboration call. And after all that, then we can start finalizing our documentation, and we can start putting together recommendations after we get all the information we can and talk to all the people that we can talk to. And we'll develop our report, and again, we'll track our recommendations that we find. So that's your kind of typical step-by-step process of a normal PHA, and I kind of went through and a normal compliance audit, and I try to go through and analyze how it would be different if we're doing this remotely. So one thing I do want to talk about is, I'm sure you guys have some stuff that are popping into your head about, hey, I don't know how we can do this or that. So there are going to be challenges, and so I'm going to be offering a potential workarounds from the challenges that I can identify off the bat. So obviously off the bat, site activities are going to be obviously we're not going to be able to do site activities from a remote audit. These include the P&ID walkdowns, which again, this is typically not done per a normal or per a de minimis audit, but obviously we do P&ID walkdowns for most of our clients because they do prefer that kind of in-depth audit, and we want to make sure the P&ID accuracy is good. So obviously P&ID walkdowns aren't going to be able to be done as an off-site audit is conducted, but I did touch upon this earlier. We said pictures will be honestly just fine if we can get the right pictures, and if we're able to ask for the right information, pictures should serve us just fine in getting this activity done. Another alternative that we've actually had clients request is just scheduling an actual day to walk down the process later in the year. If this is plausible for the client or for whatever facility we're auditing, this can always be done later. And we've actually had clients in the past really request just a later date in the walk down. I was also thinking maybe we could have someone videotape someone out in the process, or we could have a video chat with walking down the process, but there's obviously limitations to that. Some processes might not allow videotaping to walk through the process. It also might not be safe to be holding a video camera while trying to walk through piping and all that stuff. So pictures, however, I think we're able to get pictures more often than not. Another big potential challenge is going to be lack of electronic documentation. And again, I touched upon this earlier also, but this is probably going to be the biggest hindrance to getting an offsite audit done. If there is a lack of electronic documentation, it's going to be hard to review what needs to be reviewed. I mentioned one potential workaround is going to be scanning the paperwork. Would it be possible to scan whatever's not on an electronic copy to scan that in? However, I do realize that maybe this is going to be a tedious task. If none of the documentation is electronic, it's going to be hard to scan hundreds, maybe thousands of pages. So that honestly wouldn't be very feasible. But if it is a couple pieces of information you're missing, like a couple forms, is there a way to scan that paperwork in? That could be a workaround for this. Another workaround is if we can get screenshots from databases. A lot of times some sort of software is used to track the training program, to track mechanical integrity program or inspection records. And say you might not have actual PDF printouts or Word document printouts of the inspection records, but it's all logged in some sort of software. Oftentimes that software is going to be easy to manipulate, where you can kind of print out data from there. Oftentimes the kind of software that we're using will be filterable as well, so that way if I'm looking for a specific inspection record from 3 months ago for this vessel V1, that software will allow us to search up V-1 or whatever tag number we're looking for and get the training records for the history of that vessel. So this actually might be even easier to provide documentation if we're looking for specifics. So again, maybe you don't have that in an actual physical copy binder, but if it's part of a software, this still could work for an offsite audit. But like I said, this is if it's not possible to scan paperwork, or if some issues exist without having electronic documentation, we'll want to take extra steps to think about how we can combat that, because this obviously, if there's nothing to review electronically, it's going to be hard to review it if we're not in person on site. So with that, also wanted to kind of highlight some advantages that doing a remote off-site audit could have. One thing is that if the files that are available are modifiable files, and by that I mean the native files, Microsoft Word files, Microsoft Excel files, if those are handy during the review, any updates that need to be made on the spot can just be made on the spot. So for example, if they're minor updates like oh, I noticed this date was wrong, or hey, we actually did this, we actually inspected this last system 1 week ago, but the date hasn't been changed yet. We haven't gotten around to changing the date in this form, whatever. If they're modifiable files, they're easy to change right then and there. And that way you can update the revision of that and keep it for record keeping later. So during the audit, it's kind of two birds with one stone. If you had any dates or anything that needs to be updated that hasn't been updated yet, during the audit you'll find out what needs to be updated, and you can update it right then and there if you're able to access these native files. Another thing is the electronic files can be more navigable. Oftentimes we find that it might be easier to scroll through PDFs than it is to flip through numerous pages in a binder. If there's an electronic copy of your risk management plan, maybe it has bookmarks or hyperlinks in there. That way, if I'm looking for specifically the emergency response plan, I can just hyperlink to that. Usually a good RMP physical binder will have tabs delineated, right, so you can flip to whatever tab the emergency response program is. But still, you're still flipping through pages there. And again, having this stuff electronically can be very easy to sift through. You can also print a specific set of data. For example, like I said earlier about the software databases being filterable. If I was asking for a specific piece of equipment, it's like, hey, yeah, we have this whole software program that we keep track of all of our inspection records for all our vessels, all of our equipment. If I'm just asking for a specific piece of, or a specific valve or a specific piece of equipment, if it's all in paper form and it's all logged away in a file cabinet somewhere, it might be hard to sift through all those papers to find the one I'm looking for. But if we have it in a software-based program that you could search by tag number, then that could be easy to just pull up exactly what I'm looking for right away. So in that case, this could be a very big advantage for doing an offsite audit. If you're trying to be specific in what you're looking at, you could find stuff by tag number perhaps. Another thing to note about doing a remote audit is that in the long run, it's going to be desirable to have electronic copies of everything. This is going to be good for record keeping later. Eventually, I think we'll be moving to completely remote or completely electronic files at least. So at some point, it's going to have to get done. So if you have some of it electronic, some of it not, one of these offsite audits might help you to push you over the edge to get more stuff in the file server than not. Again, and I think having electronic files are going to be easier to modify. When you do have to make updates, you can just go into, like I said, the Word file and make updates, and it's going to be better in the long run for record keeping. That way you have dates associated with all the file changes and stuff like that. Not to mention that it is going to be easily accessible by everyone. If you do have some sort of central file server for your facility, having all the files in one central location where people can access it from wherever in the world really they want. They don't have to be on site to get information. That's going to be also a huge plus. Another point of an advantage that could happen from an offsite audit is if you're going to be streamlining collaboration with personnel. And this is where I get into the Microsoft Teams and Skype meetings, where if you're able to get the right personnel in on a call, then you'll be able to get the information you need right away, as opposed to if you're on site and I'm kind of asking the facility organizer, who's someone I need to talk to for mechanical integrity? Is he or she available today, or are they going to be gone when I'm off site? The beauty with Microsoft Teams and Skype and any kind of telecollaboration tool is that we're able to get people from all different locations who may not be in the physically same location. We can get them into a call and get the information we need right away. So in that case, we can involve multiple departments at once. So if the mechanical integrity person is located at a different, at the corporate headquarters downtown, as opposed to the actual facility, we won't have to have that person drive up or travel up to the facility to ask them questions in person. We can have them on a meeting. And not only that, but we could have people from different departments at once in the meeting. Another cool thing we can be doing with Microsoft Teams or Skype meetings is screen sharing capabilities. That way we're all on the same page. It'll help clear up any kind of confusion. So if I'm looking at an operating procedure, for example, and I'm on a Microsoft Teams call with an operator, I can share my screen, which which will be having the written procedures up. That way he can see the procedures that I'm looking at. The operator can see exactly what step I'm referring to, and he or she can follow along. So screen sharing could be a big plus for these kind of remote meetings. Another potential advantage is going to be offsite audit. An offsite audit is that you're going to have less travel time and less travel costs associated with an offsite audit. This is going to be really, obviously, this is taking more of a lens from a third-party consultant and hiring an external auditor to do the audit. Internal audits, obviously, this wouldn't apply, but for external audits, doing it remotely means that you really cut down significantly on travel costs, which oftentimes are a big part of the audit, a big money constraint. We'll also have more time to gather information. So if we're doing an offsite audit, the client or whoever is responsible for pulling together information, they can make sure that they pull everything together associated with a certain program element, and make sure that's complete before transmitting it electronically to the auditor. So that way, say if we're taking extra time to look for, hey, like I'm actually trying to gather all the mechanical integrity records. They're kind of spread out right now and sporadic. They're not really all in one place. If you can give me some more time to get those together, I can get you a more complete set. If that's the case, then that's okay. That's the case. We don't have to be looking at that right away. Because we're not on site, we're not really billing to be on site. We're only billing when we're working on the project. So if we're off site, we can easily switch to other tasks or a completely different project at all. So again, there might be more time to navigate files and get everything together. That way we don't have to be on site for this to take place. And also not being on site allows for a more flexible schedule. So for example, if there's someone that we need to talk to, or the head operator is out of town, or he had to leave, or she had to leave last minute for a family emergency, for example, we're not going to have to wait for that person to come back, or we're not going to have to rebook travel arrangements since we'll be leaving tomorrow, for example. Oh, well, we can't wait for that to happen. Having them on the call means that this eliminates any kind of problems with that. So if something does come up during the audit where normally we're on site and we have to postpone it, we have to book for travel arrangements that are obviously expensive if you book last minute. Again, this is going to be only applying to really hiring a third-party consultant, but I think you guys get the gist there. So that was kind of just a couple highlights there of doing a remote audit. In terms of closing remarks, I kind of reiterated this before through the presentation so far, but preparation is going to be key here. You guys want to make sure that we're really prepared to do this offsite audit. We want to make sure everyone's on the same page. We want to make sure that the documents we have are available electronically, and if they're not, that they will be available electronically before the audit begins. We want to make sure that people know that we want to make sure who is going to be expected to be on calls and who's going to be expected to be on standby if we have follow-up questions. Another part of this, if we're looking at this from kind of a third-party perspective, is that we want to make sure that the documentation we're requesting from the client is detailed and organized. That way, when we do our audit in the first place, then we could have more specific details of what equipment we're looking at. For example, what date range we're looking at. Again, if you're doing this internally or externally, it's specific in terms of what date range you want to look at for what specific pieces of equipment. This will help you ensure whether the program that's being maintained is actually adequate and that it's being compliant, that you're actually following through with whatever you're doing. You don't just have one equipment record from 2009 and then nothing else. By asking for specific date ranges, we can see whether that piece of documentation exists or not. Another closing remark I want to leave you guys with is to be objective and be as objective as possible. And the best way to be objective and not biased is to be specific in the information that you review. So for example, if you're going to look at maintenance records, again, like I said, you want to pick a specific piece of equipment and pick a specific date range of inspection records. You really don't want to be as biased, and I think with doing an offsite or remote audit, it'll be it'll be more easy. It'll be easier to kind of be, hey, I know that we're not really looking at that. I'm gonna look at something else instead that I know we're maintaining as part of my audit. So it'll be kind of easier to be lazy, I guess is not maybe the word to use, but you want to be as objective as possible. Like I said, again, if you're reviewing your maintenance program, and say that I'm an external auditor, I'm an external consultant reviewing the maintenance program, I want to be specific in the information that I request. I want to ask you specifically what kind of vessel I'm looking for. That way the client won't just send me information on vessels that they know they are maintaining and purposely exclude vessels that they know they aren't maintaining for the documentation that I'm going to review. Say if you're doing this internally as an internal auditor from the company, you want to make sure that there is proper implementation across the program that you are reviewing. So you want to make sure that you also are analyzing areas that may have a history of being overlooked. So again, whether you're doing this internally or externally, you want to be fair. You don't want to be biased. The goal here is to make sure that whatever program is being maintained, or whatever program is being reviewed, is being actually addressed and is effective, and will be better suited for the long run. So with that being said, I hope you guys found this helpful. If you guys have any questions or any follow-ups, or if you have any feedback for me or for the company, please let us know. We actually would want to hear it. If you have any questions, you guys can reach me at the email that's on the screen there directly, or you can go ahead and give a call to 949-282-0123, or the other number listed below, 877-532-0806. But yeah, I hope you guys did find this helpful. For more information on compliance audits, where we go more in depth of exactly what is reviewed, my colleague did a webinar recently on this, and so this should be on our webpage, www.rmpcorp.com, and that'll be linked to our YouTube channel where we have most of the webinars. But again, this webinar didn't really go into the details of a compliance audit. It didn't go into what kind of equipment or what kind of documentation is actually reviewed. But please refer to our other webinars that actually do go into good detail about that kind of stuff. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys found this helpful. And again, if there's any questions or feedback, feel free to let us know. Thank you.